Hi, this is Elliot, and today on Talking Feds, we're talking about a former Fed who's doing some talking of his own, and that's Mike Pence. Remember him? Former Vice President of the United States, who very recently spoke to a federal grand jury. For the first time, certainly in modern American history, that someone with a title like that, or with a former job like that, went in and submitted, in effect, to the criminal justice system. So first things first, it's important to step back and think about what a profound moment that is for our legal system, regardless of what anyone thinks of Mike Pence or the special counsel or any of the individuals involved here. This is a big moment. It's a very big deal. I won't use the other word that President Biden has used when talking about these things. So it's self-significant in Pence's role, but also not, because when we think about the grand jury, it is a very common, almost mundane, everyday element of our criminal justice system that gets used in courthouses and federal buildings across the country every single day. What's significant is the job of the person who's speaking to it this time. But at the end of the day, the grand jury is actually relatively routine. So how did we get to Mike Pence, someone with that role, testifying before the grand jury? And like Sophia Petrillo would have said in Golden Girls, let me take you back, not to Palermo, Sicily, but let's take you back to the first subpoena that came for the vice president's testimony. He was subpoenaed, asked to come in and testify. And as is often the case with subpoenas, there were a few legal challenges to the sort of legitimacy of the subpoena. And one came from Pence himself, but another came from former President Trump. Now, former President Trump wanted to block Vice President Pence from testifying on the basis of what's called executive privilege. It's a very important privilege or protection for testimony that exists in our system, which is that the President of the United States and his close aides and close advisors are entitled to almost a bubble of protection around conversations they have with each other about the work of the American people. And that's actually a good thing. You want your president, I want my president, to be able to have candid, clear discussions about policy with his top staff and his senior aides, and that is okay. The problem is that executive privilege cannot be and is not a shield for everything, a protection for every word that comes out of president or former president's mouth. And, executive privilege rests with the current holder of the presidency. So it's up to President Biden to decide, in effect, who or what the reach of executive privilege is for his predecessor. So that was former President Trump, and he lost that fight in a few different instances, but certainly notably here. Then Vice President Pence also brought a challenge to the grand jury subpoena on the basis of what's called the speech or debate clause of the Constitution. And just as a note, you can dazzle your friends at cocktail parties by noting that it's called the speech or debate clause, not the speech and debate clause, which is the more common term. But what the speech or debate clause serves to do is shield members of Congress from the words they say in the context of carrying out their jobs. Also, in practice, something that's very important, and we don't want members of Congress being sued every single day simply for doing their jobs. Regardless of what political party you are, you don't want another member of Congress sued simply because someone disagrees with them. Now, if they've broken the law or done something untoward, of course they should be subject to lawsuits. But simply for the normal policy disagreements that happen, you want protections for members of Congress, or at least I do. Again, you can disagree with me in the comments here if that's not your jam. Now, so the question you might be having is, why is Mike Pence, this former vice president, not a member of Congress, even though he was many years ago? But why is he talking about the speech or debate clause? But go back to Article 1 of the Constitution. And when we talk about the vice president, that person serves not just as the number 2 to the president, but also a very important role called the president of the Senate. He serves as the presiding officer of the United States Senate. And in that capacity, at least as the argument goes, he's entitled to some speech or debate protection. So Mike Pence sues and says, wait a second, I'm the former vice president. My words ought to be protected, and I can't submit to a grand jury. That's just not the way this works. He sort of won and lost that fight in court. He won in the sense that the court said, look, the vice president, regardless of the fact that he's not a member of Congress or elected or whatever else, is entitled in some measures to speech or debate protection, but not all. And in this instance, Mike Pence can be made to testify, subpoenaed, compelled to testify about conversations that he had with the former president or everything up to his official role on January 6th, but just not the things he did in his official role as president of the Senate. Maybe the words he said or the things he prepared with his staff while sitting in the chair at the top of the Senate. So that's how we got here. And that's why Mike Pence came in to testify. Now, the question that you might have and should have is, well, what did he say? And the answer is, I don't know. And nobody really knows right now, because the simple fact is, proceedings before grand juries are secret. You're not allowed to know by law. And there's huge penalties, significant penalties that one can have for releasing information that comes out of a grand jury. It's private. So we don't know exactly what he said. I don't think anybody does. But, there are probably some key points that, look, if I were a prosecutor and I'm a former prosecutor, I know your beloved host, Harry, is himself a storied former prosecutor. But these are the things that I think prosecutors are trying to get to the bottom of by calling the former vice president. Number one, the big one to me, did Donald Trump ever convey to Mike Pence that he knew that he lost the 2020 election? I think it doesn't sound like the sexiest question, but I actually think legally that's a very, very important one, because a number of crimes that the special counsel might be investigating sort of hinge around this question of whether Donald Trump knew and articulated that he lost the election. So, for instance, it is believed that the special counsel might be looking into the crime of conspiracy to defraud the United States. And that crime requires artifice or trickery or fraud. And in order to do that, someone needs to know that they're lying or not telling the truth about something. And so an expression by a political candidate that he knows he lost an election is itself could be an element of a conspiracy to defraud the United States charge, if in fact he uses that to commit acts of fraud. Some other ones, it is believed or sort of reported in the media that the special counsel might be looking into wire fraud or mail fraud, both of which, again, depend in some way on, does the person know or are they aware, or should they have been aware that something that they're aware of is untrue, and they're continuing to present that information. So those are, I think that question of does he know he lost is a big one. And did Mike Pence have any conversations with him? Could Pence testify about that? So that's the first one. Could Pence testify that President Trump knew that he lost the election, right? Did they have that conversation? Number two, did former President Trump direct Mike Pence to take any actions on January 6th? Did he push him or suggest that he not certify the election or coerce him in any way? And that could potentially be legally relevant and an important thing to get to the bottom of. So we'll see what happens there. And then finally, so that's number two. And then finally, the third thing that would be relevant to hear from Mike Pence, well, what'd you overhear? Even if you weren't privy one-on-one to a conversation with the president, you can testify, Mike Pence, as to conversations you overheard, things you saw, people you saw coming in and out of the Oval Office or White House or whatever else it might be. And those are relevant questions and all fair game for the special counsel to ask about. Now, the big question coming out of that testimony, and I'd be curious about this, is, well, what didn't Mike Pence answer? Did he actually continue to try to raise speech or debate objections, or step out of the room and talk to his counsel and say, wait a second, this is getting perilously close to things that I should not be testifying about? Time will tell. There'll be books written about this a decade from now, and maybe we'll all find out what happened in that room, but we don't know. And certainly if anybody leaks any of this information, there could be mucho trouble for anyone who does. And then, of course, if somebody's charged with a crime following all of this, perhaps the information will come out. We shall see. Lots of unknown questions. And this is sort of the case with grand juries all the time. You simply just don't know until you know. But that's some of the backdrop. Stay tuned, and we'll talk more about all of this. Thanks so much for listening.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.